Okay, so before I show you how to make my easy whole wheat sandwich bread, let me go over a few basics of wheat with you. Now, number one, there are two basic kinds of wheat that you can store for food storage. One of them is white wheat. You can see it's light in color. The second one is a red wheat. You can see it's darker in color. This red wheat has a more intense flavor than this white wheat. This is probably what you grew up on. This is what I grew up on if you had a mom who was into food storage. The white wheat has a much lighter flavor and is much easier disguised in all of your baked goods. Now, a lot of people ask, well, doesn't the red wheat have a higher protein content? And it does, but just by a tiny bit. So my whole philosophy is, if I were to use the red wheat, I would have to put in some all-purpose flour to make my family like it because it has such a strong flavor. Then I'm cutting the protein content anyway, so I might as well just go with the white wheat and be able to use it 100% in my cookies and cakes and bread. Now, the second thing we need to talk about is the best place to get your wheat. Now, any of the basic food storage products are always best to buy from the LDS cannery, and you can buy those online. You don't have to be LDS or Mormon, and you're going to get the best price possible. Now, case in point, let me put this wheat back in this can because I just opened it. So a number 10 can of wheat from the church cannery, from the LDS church cannery, is about $4.50 a can. I just opened this can. It happens to be from Thrive, but this is pretty much across the board any food storage company. This can at Thrive costs $7.58, plus it's not even all the way full. Now, when you get a can from the cannery, they're going to fill it all the way to the top, and because they're not making a profit on you, they're just passing on what they paid, you're always going to get the best price. And you can even double check that because when you look at the weight on the LDS cannery website, it says you're going to get 33 pounds for 6 cans. And on you're only going to get almost 5 pounds in a can from Thrive. So that's really every food storage company, not to single out Thrive. It's just that's what I had to show you. Now I'm going to go ahead and grind my wheat in my Nutrimill. The wheat grinders that I like are the K-Tech or Blendtec kitchen mill, or now it's called a, what's it called now? Anyway, Blend Mill or something from K-Tech or Blendtec. That's good. It's a good, cheaper, smaller, but it's very loud. I like the Nutrimill. It's got this pull out that I'm going to pull the wheat out in. It's very quiet because it has this lid that I can put on top. So I'm going to go ahead and grind my wheat, and then we will show you how to make the bread. Okay, now let me show you how I do this easy sandwich bread. This is the best bread ever. In fact, my kids and I have a business where we sell this bread. So I'm totally letting you in on the family secret. Now what we're going to do to start with is we're going to need 7.5 cups of hot water because I'm going to do 6 loaves in my bough. This recipe is very easily done, just 2 loaves, and it will fit in your KitchenAid, and it works just as well on the KitchenAid. So let me get the 7.5 cups of hot water. 6. Now this is, I usually have my kids help me with this part, right? Helps them learn how to count by 2s. Okay. So there's our 7.5 cups of, warm to hot water like you would use for making bread. We're going to use a scant, which means slightly less than 1/3 cup of instant yeast. Now I use the dry instant yeast and I get mine from Costco. Whatever you do not fall for the food storage company's ploys to buy yeast from them. It is so expensive, and you can very easily get yeast in bulk at, like Winco or Costco, Sam's Club. Any of those places are going to carry the yeast. Much cheaper. Now we're going to add in our sugar. We're going to put in 2 cups of sugar. Now you can either use honey, and you can use even a little bit less honey because honey is, sweeter for its pack a punch, We're going to use 2 cups of sugar, but it calls for brown sugar. But you know me, I don't buy brown sugar anymore. I make my own. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 2 cups of white sugar, and then I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of molasses. Now, I don't buy my brown sugar anymore because I go to a box store like Smart & Final, and I buy a really large bottle of molasses for about the price of a tiny bottle that you would get at the grocery store. So I can make my brown sugar a whole lot cheaper. And then anytime I have a recipe that calls for brown sugar, I just add in the sugar and add in some molasses, and I've got my brown sugar. So there's my 2 cups of white sugar. Then we're going to put in 2 tablespoons of molasses. Now if you want to make your life really easy, you can spray your tablespoon with, like Pam or nonstick spray before you add it in. And so it's 1 tablespoon molasses and 1 cup of white sugar is a great substitute for brown sugar. And that brown sugar in this wheat bread, brown sugar is awesome anytime you're using anything with wheat because it's already got that moisture in it and it's a little bit darker color, so it does a world of good when you are trying to disguise wheat in things. So there's our sugar, and that sugar is going to get together with that yeast, and that yeast is just going to love it, start eating it up, and really get puffy and get going. Now there's no need to wait. You can usually already see that your yeast is starting to dissolve and it's starting to work, so I just keep going. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my dough enhancer ingredients. Now we're not going to buy a dough enhancer either because those little cans of dough enhancer are like $7. That's a ton. When we can just use our food storage products and make our own dough enhancer. So we're going to start out with some vinegar. Now vinegar is an acid and that is going to help our bread. Now the rule is you want to use the same amount, no more, as you used yeast. So we're going to do just a little bit less than 1/3 of a cup of vinegar. Now some people use like crushed up vitamin C tablets, and that does the same thing. I just think vinegar is a whole lot cheaper and it's something that you have around. So we're going to go ahead and add that, and then we're going to use gluten. Now I know gluten's totally taboo these days, but let me make a case for gluten, okay? Gluten is a vegetarian protein, and so it's actually going to add more protein to your bread, and it's going to add up that protein content. So come on, it's healthier a little bit. If you can handle gluten, this is your stuff. I get mine from Honeyville when they run coupons a lot, and so I stock up then, but places like Winco in their bulk section also carry gluten. And what you want to do is you want to factor in 1 tablespoon of gluten per cup of flour. Now the reason why gluten is so great when it comes to wheat is gluten's basically what makes those bubbles in your bread. And so when you add the extra gluten to it, you are strengthening those bubbles. So basically all these dough enhancers are going to strengthen those bubbles because wheat in itself is very sharp. The bran in the wheat is very sharp, and when you start kneading that around, it starts messing with those bubbles, and that's why wheat bread can a lot of times be very flat and very dense. And that's why this bread's going to be very light and fluffy and unlike any other wheat bread you've ever tried. So when we're doing 6 times the loaves, we're going to need 1.5 cups of gluten. So we're just going to do 3/4 cups. I wanted to show you the real deal so you can actually see how easy this is and not have it all staged out in the little cups, because this really is quite easy to make. And then the next thing we're going to add is potato flakes. Now mine come from the cannery, even though my lid's upside down. Whoops, opened it on the wrong side. We're not going to use potato buds. They're artificially flavored with butter, and so it's going to mess with the flavor of your bread. So we're just going to use the cheapest potato flakes around, and that again is going to be from the LDS Cannery. Any of these basic items that the LDS Cannery sells, you're always going to get the best price there, right? We get it. Okay. So we're going to do 1.5 cups as well of the potato flakes, and it's pretty much the same as the gluten, about 1 tablespoon per cup of flour. You can mess around with it a little bit if you want to. You can also, this is what Pioneer women would do, they would use the water that they bake their potatoes in, because that water is also going to have the starch. Now the starch from the potato flakes sort of acts like goo to bicycle tires. My husband likes to bicycle, and he puts goo in his tires. It strengthens his tires so that they don't pop. Well, that's the same thing the starch and the acid are doing. And also actually the sugar is also part of our dough enhancer, because that really gets the yeast going. What we're looking for, those nice stretchy bubbles, that's what's going to give us that light texture and really wonderful bread. So now that we've added that in, we're going to add in our salt. Now the salt is 2 tablespoons of salt. And I just get my salt when it's on sale and stock up. There's our 2 tablespoons for that. And we're also going to put in butter. We're going to put in 1/3 cup of butter. And I just pulled my butter from the fridge, so that's why I diced it up into the small pieces. But because the water is so warm, it's really going to melt quite fast in that warm water, so I don't usually worry a ton about having it be at a really great temperature. If it's just really cold, I cut it up into smaller pieces so that it can melt faster. Now, the last thing or one of the last things we're going to put in is our flour. Now, I just ground this flour from my wheat grinder, and I wanted to show you how I did it so that we don't make a mess, right? Because sometimes wheat grinders can be a little messy. So, I take off my lid, and I put it over my, my bough, okay? Then you can just put it on top and tap it. You get a lot of that flour off and not on your counters. Now, if you're using your wheat grinder and flour starts blowing out from it, that's because you filled your hopper too full with wheat, which I am definitely guilty of. I get a little zealous every once in a while when it comes to trying to fill my wheat grinder up as full as possible. Okay, so now for this, we're going to put in half the flour right now so that we can put our powdered milk on top. Putting our powdered milk on top, because if you put it in before, you will get powdered milk clumps in your bread, which is nasty and we don't want. So, what happened to my cup? Oh, here we go. Okay, so we're going to do like 8 cups of flour, and then we're going to go ahead and put in our 3/4 cup powdered milk on top. That will mix in with the flour so that we don't get clumps in our bread. That took me a really long time to figure out. I used to always wonder why I had these clumps in my bread. And then I figured out it was the powdered milk. Then I figured out if I added it at the end on top of my flour, I didn't get those clumps anymore. So that is a really good trick anytime you are doing bread, to always put in your powdered milk at the very end or on top of your flour so that you don't get that mess. Okay. So now we're going to add in our 3/4 cup of powdered milk. Now, again, I get my powdered milk from the LDS cannery, and that is where you're going to get the best deal. I'm going to put my lid on top, and I'm going to have it mix around until it's incorporated, and then I'm going to add in the rest of my flour. Okay, so it's incorporated. I can show you. So it just looks like this. It's soupy, obviously, because I only have half of the flour in there. We don't even need it really mixed in a ton. We just want it mixed in enough that we can add in the rest of the flour. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the rest of my 8 cups of flour. And then I'm going to use my bread trick. Now, my bread trick is I don't have all day to make bread. And especially when you have a bough, you have the power to shortcut your bread. Now, how you do that is you are going to knead this on, let's say, 1 or 2, probably 2, and you're going to knead it for like 15 minutes just in your bough. And when you do that, that's going to develop those gluten strands so they get nice and stretchy. You want them, you think of them sort of like rubber bands. You want them all warm so that they stretch more when they're baking. We can do that by kneading for about 15 minutes. Then when it's done kneading, you just turn it off, let it take a nap. That's what I tell my kids. It's taking a nap for about 10 minutes, and then you can go ahead and shape your loaves, let it rise, and bake. That cuts out like 45 minutes to an hour depending on what you're doing, and it's a great bread trick. I use it all the time. Anytime I'm making bread, it is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and get this going. You want to make sure that you have enough flour, and the way that you're going to know you have enough flour is when your bowl starts cleaning itself because it has enough flour. If it's not, you need to add in a little more at a time. So let's go ahead and get this going and see how it looks. Okay, so as you can see, it's starting to clean the sides of the bowl. And so I'm just going to go ahead and let it knead with this top lid off so that air can escape, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of steam in there and it's going to make your dough sticky again. So we're going to go ahead and let this knead for 15 minutes and then we'll look at it from there. So it's been about 15 minutes and I want to show you what the dough looks like now. Let me go ahead and unlock it here. You're going to see some great gluten strands here. That's what we want. Another way you can tell is at this point it should not be sticky when you touch it like this. And the other trick that I use, this is anytime I make bread, you can tell when the dough is the right consistency, and I mean like flour to stickiness ratio, because I think it should feel like baby cheeks. So the dough should be nice and soft and kind of plush, just like baby cheeks would be. Now I'm going to go ahead and let this dough sit and rest, take a nap for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to shape it and show you all the tricks for that. Okay, so as you can see, it definitely had a nice good nap and it's already starting to rise. So I want to go ahead and get it out of my bowl. My trick for doing that is I usually spray my hands with some non-stick spray, and then it makes it really easy to get it out of the bowl. Now, when you're using, or when you're going to do wheat bread, we need to talk bread pans now. Let's get this out, just sort of clean off the dough hooks. then you can give your counter a little bit of a spray. That way we don't get the flour everywhere on the counters. I'm gonna go ahead and dump this out. Now this makes 6 loaves, but you need to know when you're doing wheat bread that you need to use a special bread pan, one that's a little bit smaller, because when we're doing whole wheat, it makes it a little bit harder for those gluten strands to get all the way across the pan. So if you use a larger pan like this, which is something you'd use for white bread, as opposed to something like this, which is your wheat pan, when you use this larger one, sometimes the bread has a hard time reaching all the way across and it can fall. So there's my other trick, is to use a pan that is, this one is a Wilton one, it's 8.5 by 4.5 by 2.5 inches. And we'll put a link on the post so that you can see where you can get those if you don't have them. Now we need to separate this dough into 6 equal sections. And I am super precise, or some people might call it OCD. So I use a scale. Now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to divide it in half. And then I'm going to take my halves and I'm going to divide those into thirds. Now this is actually a great way to teach your kids fractions. I was amazed the other day, my 5-year-old figured out fractions and how to divide things up so you can get the right number. This is why I love having my kids in the kitchen with me. Okay, and then you can just weigh out your pieces and make sure that they are all the same size. Now when you have them all weighed out and you have them the same size, let me show you the correct way to roll out your dough. Now some people just shape it like this in their hands until it's sort of a dough shape. I think this is the Chef Brad trick, right? And then you take it and you give it a big thump in your bread pan and it gets out the air bubbles. So that's one way you can do it. The other way that you can do it is to take your rolling pin and just roll it out. When you roll it out like this, you're getting out all those air bubbles so you don't get one of those annoying big bubbles in your bread that really ruins your ability to make a good sandwich. So you're just gonna roll it out kind of in a rectangle shape. And as you do this, you can sort of hear the bubbles popping. It almost sounds like somebody like clicking their gum. And I like to pick it up and flip it over because then you get the smooth side on the outside. And you're just gonna roll it up like this. And this is my kid's favorite part. You karate chop the ends and you fold them under. Like so. Then you can just stick it in your, put your bread in your bread pan and have it rise until it's about doubled. Okay, so I have all of my 6 loaves shaped and ready to rise. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave them on the counter until they've risen to about the top of my pan. And then we're gonna go ahead and bake them, and then I have one more trick to show you. Okay, so I just put in my loaves into my oven. It's actually a cold oven. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna close it up and I'm going to preheat it now and go ahead and set it for its baking instructions. Now what this is gonna do is it's gonna allow it to rise the rest of the way in the oven while it's heating up and then start baking. Okay, I wanted to show you now that the loaves have risen up to the top of the pan, I actually went ahead and put them in my cold oven and set it to bake at 375. We're going to bake it for about 25 minutes, but doing it this way allows for the bread to go ahead and start rising and baking. Okay, so I just pulled my bread out of the oven. I wanted to show you what it looks like. Let me pick a good one here. Here it is baked. It's super delicious. If you don't want this as dark as it gets, you can just simply put some aluminum foil on it about halfway. Now I ended up baking this for about 35 minutes. I think I said 25 before, but it ended up being 35. And as soon as it gets out of the oven, I just put whatever little bit of butter is left that I didn't use earlier, and I put it on top for a nice butter top. Now if you're ever nervous that your bread isn't cooked all the way, you can just pull it out and use a meat thermometer. You want to make sure the internal temperature is about 190, so you can just kind of dump it into your hand and use a meat thermometer, make sure it's in about halfway, and then check the temperature and make sure it is 190. If you don't do that, it's not going to cook all the way in the middle, and as it cools, it will create a big hole down the middle of your loaf that is super annoying when you are trying to make sandwiches for your kids. So I'm going to go ahead and finish buttering these up, and then we'll slice it up. And I wish I could give you a slice because right now my house smells so good. But I will go ahead and show you what it looks like sliced and how delicious it looks and how it passes what I call the peanut butter and jelly test. Okay, so as you can see in the background, I have taken the bread loaves out of the pan and I put it on a cooling rack to cool. Now I wanted to show you how I store my bread really fast. Once that's been cooled for about 15 minutes, I go ahead and put it in my handy dandy bread bags. Now I got these bread bags in like 1,000 quantity off of Amazon, and they work really well for storing bread because they how soft it is. Whoa, it is hot. But that is when bread is the best, right out of the oven. So I want to show you, you can see, I can almost, let's see, I can bend it in half and it doesn't break. You can tell you can smush it together like white bread and it smushes together. Super soft. Now this is a loaf that I had made previously, you know, for the week, and I made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now to me, sandwich bread has to pass the peanut butter and jelly test, and to me, that is because peanut butter and jelly is so like soft and delicate that when I eat it with the bread, I want it to all mash together and not have like this thick, stiff, you know, store-bought stale bread. Because once you start making bread at home, whenever you buy store-bought bread, you're going to realize it's stale. No matter how fresh you think you might be able to get it, it is still going to taste stale compared to fresh out of your oven. So I just want to show you here. See, it's still bendy. It's still super soft. Ooh, my honey's dripping out. I did honey, I cheated. But it's so soft that your kids are going to love it on their sandwiches. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this. And